Buckingham Palace has tonight announced the death of the oldest member of the royal family, Catherine, the Duchess of Kent.
Buckingham Palace releasing a statement confirming she died at her home in Kensington Palace.
Imagine firing off a heartfelt condolence email and getting hit with radio silence.
It's really quite sad.
For most of us, it's an awkward moment, but when Prince Harry got ignored by the Duke of Kent,
Buckingham Palace announced today that the oldest member of the royal family had passed away. The official notice, as is tradition, was displayed on the railings outside.
After the royal family's sad announcement, he didn't just feel awkward, he reportedly lost it.
But apparently for me, that doesn't matter.
And honestly, who can be surprised?
Is there even a way back for him as the prodigal son?
And who cares?
Harry and Meghan have turned silence into their ultimate enemy because silence doesn't sell Netflix deals.
Those close to the Duke say he hasn't given up on finding a way to bring his family to Britain. I'm sure he'll find a way.
Silence doesn't headline tabloids, and silence doesn't fuel the poor us narrative they've been milking since stepping off the royal stage.
People don't care anymore. Harry has burnt his bridges fully with the British public.
This wasn't just a snub. To Harry, it was an insult. A rejection, another reminder that the palace doesn't play by his Hollywood script.
If you open the door, even a tiny crack, these two are going to keep on damaging your reputation.
And while the Duke of Kent kept dignity in mourning, Harry once again dragged grief into drama.
That I won't be able to show, my children my homeland.
Turning what should have been respect for the late Duchess into yet another performance about himself.
She wasn't a rebel. She did what she wanted, but she was always very conscious of her position and, never wanted to upset the Queen, and nor did she upset her.
But here's the twist. That silence may have spoken louder than any email ever could. And trust me, what comes next will leave you questioning whether Harry has completely lost the plot.
Because Harry is so pig-headed and arrogant and stubborn when it comes to that I don't think he'll ever.
The passing of the Duchess of Kent should have been a moment that united the royal family in quiet dignity. She was known for her compassion, her decades of service, and her ability to stay out of the circus of scandals that now seem to define the monarchy's younger generation.
Where she regularly handed out trophies. She supported a charity for homeless people.
The public remembered her for her charity work and her warmth, not for grabbing headlines, not for tantrums, and certainly not for turning grief into a Netflix pitch. But while the nation mourned with respect, Harry reportedly found a way to twist even this solemn occasion into a stage for his own frustrations.
She was just simply Mrs. Kent. She was just part of the staff team on that day when she came into school and taught.
Instead of reflecting on the Duchess's legacy, insiders suggest Harry became fixated on his email, the condolence message he expected to be acknowledged instantly. Never mind that the Duke of Kent has always been a man of restraint, someone who upholds traditions that prize silence over spectacle.
I learned more from these children than I ever taught them. They taught me, it's just indescribable. I mean that absolutely sincerely.
For Harry, if the spotlight isn't on him, then something must be wrong. It's as if he cannot comprehend that grief sometimes demands privacy, not publicity. The irony is painful. A duchess remembered for her quiet strength, overshadowed by a grandson who can't resist turning every family moment into a tabloid drama. While the Duke of Kent carried himself with the same discretion that defined the late Duchess, Harry reportedly raged like a teenager left on red, and that, more than anything, shows how far he's drifted from the values the monarchy once stood for.
She made headlines when she broke royal protocol to hug a runner-up at the Wimbledon Tennis Championships.
But here's the kicker. His fury was just warming up. When news broke of the Duchess of Kent's passing, Harry reportedly rushed to send a condolence email to the Duke of Kent. On the surface, that sounds like a thoughtful gesture, but the reality, it reeked less of compassion and more of performance. For a man who spends half his time lecturing the world about privacy, Harry seems obsessed with making sure every move he makes is noticed, acknowledged, and broadcast. Sending that email wasn't just about paying respect, it was about expecting a pat on the back. Here's the problem. The Duke of Kent isn't Meghan's Hollywood PR team. He's an elder statesman of the monarchy, a man who doesn't operate on Harry's need for instant validation. And yet, Harry reportedly waited, growing restless when his inbox stayed silent. The man who fled Britain to escape the toxicity of the institution suddenly seemed desperate for the institution to notice him. It's hypocrisy on a royal scale. Instead of honoring the Duchess's memory in silence like the rest of the family, Harry turned the absence of a reply into a full-blown crisis. It wasn't about grief anymore. It was about ego. A true condolence should be selfless, but for Harry, it became another audition for sympathy points. Another episode in the endless soap opera he insists on starring in.
That moment in 1993 that
many will remember when the losing women's finalist Jana Novotná was incredibly distressed, and the Duchess was very empathetic, hugged her.
And when that email met with nothing but silence, that's when Harry's simmering resentment boiled over into something far uglier. For anyone who actually understands the royal family, the Duke of Kent's silence wasn't shocking. This is a man shaped by decades of service, duty, and tradition. In the monarchy, silence during mourning isn't coldness, it's respect. Words are rationed, appearances are measured, and dignity outweighs drama. But Harry, he apparently took that silence as the ultimate slap in the face. Instead of grasping that the Duke was honoring the Duchess's passing in the most royal way possible. And quietly, Harry reportedly stewed, convinced he'd been deliberately ignored. And here's the brutal truth. Not every lack of response is rejection. But Harry, raised in privilege yet desperate for constant reassurance, seems incapable of accepting that sometimes he's just not the center of attention. To him, silence isn't protocol, it's betrayal. The Duke of Kent stayed rooted in tradition, while Harry twisted restraint into a personal attack. That's not just insecurity, that's entitlement on steroids. The irony is almost painful. The Duke's silence reflected the very values the late Duchess embodied: humility, privacy, and quiet strength. But instead of honoring those values, Harry reportedly fumed like a reality TV star cut from the final episode. It wasn't about the Duchess anymore, it was about Harry's wounded pride.
Her most unconventional step, however, was to teach music, her greatest passion, at a state primary school in Hull, not as a royal, but as Mrs. Kent, for more than a decade there.
And as insiders whispered about his growing frustration, one thing became clear. If the Duke's silence was dignified, Harry's outrage was downright humiliating. But believe it or not, this tantrum was only the beginning. The silence from the Duke of Kent should have been the end of the story. A private email sent, a quiet acknowledgement expected, and then everyone moves on to mourn. But for Harry, it became the spark that lit another bonfire of resentment. Instead of reading the room, he reportedly read his inbox on repeat, spiraling when no reply appeared. What should have been an act of kindness twisted into an ego test he couldn't pass. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Harry wasn't outraged because the Duke was rude. He was outraged because the silence reminded him of something he can't stand: irrelevance. To the palace, grief takes priority over emails. To Harry, he takes priority over grief. That's why insiders claim he kept pushing, as if acknowledgement from the Duke was some badge of legitimacy he couldn't live without. It's almost tragic in its predictability. A man who once walked away from royal duty to be free is still shackled to needing royal validation. His anger wasn't noble, it was needy. And instead of appearing compassionate, he looked like a man furious that the world didn't stop to applaud him during a funeral. This wasn't just outrage, it was exposure. It revealed Harry's constant battle between the life he chose and the recognition he still craves.
The King and Queen and all members of the royal family join the Duke of Kent, his children and grandchildren, in mourning their loss and remembering fondly the Duchess's lifelong devotion to all the organisations with which she was associated.
And the timing couldn't have been worse, because the media was waiting to pounce on every crack in his armor. And when the headlines hit, they were brutal. If Harry thought his outrage would stay hidden behind palace walls, he underestimated the very machine he claims to despise. The tabloids caught wind of his fury, and within hours, headlines screamed of a prince livid and snubbed. For newspapers, this wasn't just a story, it was a buffet. They painted him as the hot-headed royal who couldn't handle being ignored, the man-child raging over an unanswered email, while Britain quietly remembered a beloved Duchess. The contrast couldn't have been harsher. The Duke of Kent remained dignified. The rest of the family stayed composed, and Harry, he was splashed across front pages as the angry exile who once again made grief about himself. Every headline sharpened the image he's tried so hard to escape: petty, entitled, and out of sync with royal tradition. What makes this sting worse is how predictable it was. Harry has spent years feeding the press with grievances, and now every outburst is open season. The media didn't need to invent drama. Harry handed it to them on a silver platter, and Meghan wasn't spared either. Whispers tied her to the narrative, amplifying the Sussex circus storyline that tabloids adore. In the end, Harry's fury over silence created the loudest noise of all, noise that echoed across front pages, morning shows, and social media feeds. And if he thought the coverage was harsh, he hadn't seen anything yet, because the digital firestorm was about to erupt.
When she was in floods of tears there and deeply upset, and it was a moment, I think, where it was obvious that there was a real empathy in terms of the public engagement that the Duchess of Kent carried out.
If the tabloids bruised Harry, social media finished the job. Within hours, Twitter lit up with memes mocking the prince ghosted by email. TikTok clips stitched together dramatic reenactments of Harry refreshing his inbox, while Instagram accounts blasted him as the world's most sensitive royal. Hashtags like inbox drama and snubbed Sussex that trended not out of sympathy, but pure mockery. Younger audiences, usually more forgiving toward the Sussexes, joined in the laughter. They weren't debating royal protocol. protocol. They were roasting Harry like a character in a sitcom. To them, his meltdown wasn't tragic. It was comedy gold. Meanwhile, older generations rolled their eyes, calling it another example of Harry proving he can dish out criticism but can't handle being ignored. And here's the kicker. Social media thrives on humiliation, and Harry served it on a platter. What he saw as betrayal, the internet saw as entertainment. Instead of mourning the Duchess, people were busy memeing her grandson into oblivion. Once again, Harry lost the narrative, because when the world sees you less as a prince and more as a punchline, your reputation doesn't just take a hit, it gets annihilated. The unanswered email wasn't just a one-off embarrassment, it was another brick in the wall Harry has built between himself and the royal family. Every feud, every outburst, every public gripe has widened the gap, and this incident fit the pattern perfectly. Instead of bridging the divide during a time of loss, Harry managed to dig the trench deeper. It's almost impressive how he turns moments of unity into opportunities for drama.
The Duke and Duchess did not have to give up their place in the line of succession, however, as the law then demanded, because Catherine was Anglican when they married.
What the Duke of Kent's silence exposed wasn't cruelty. It was how fragile Harry's standing truly is. He spent years torching his ties, and now he's shocked when no one rushes to comfort him. The royals operate with restraint, but Harry operates with resentment, and every clash leaves him looking like the outsider begging for a seat at a table he publicly flipped over. Meghan's influence lingers in the background too, with critics pointing out that together they've weaponized victimhood into a brand. The problem is, a brand built on burning bridges eventually runs out of fuel. This email drama didn't create the royal rift. It just reminded the world that Harry has perfected the art of widening. The late Duchess of Kent left behind a legacy of humility, compassion, and quiet service. She spent decades working for causes without demanding applause, embodying the kind of dignity the monarchy was built on. And then there's Harry, the complete opposite. Where she was discreet, he is disruptive. Where she gave quietly, he demands recognition loudly. It's almost insulting that in the shadow of her passing, Harry managed to turn the spotlight back onto himself. The Duchess will be remembered for her humanity. Harry, meanwhile, risks being remembered for his habit of turning personal slights into public theater. His so-called battle for truth often looks less like courage and more like desperation to stay relevant. By throwing tantrums over an unanswered email, he didn't just dishonor protocol, he dishonored the values the Duchess embodied her whole life. This clash isn't just generational, it's philosophical.
She had a tenderness and an empathy to her that made her very memorable in some people's minds.
The Duchess proved that true influence requires no megaphone. Harry proves that without constant noise, he fears disappearing. One left behind a legacy, the other seems intent on leaving behind chaos. And with this episode, the gulf between those two legacies has never looked wider. So what started as a solemn moment of mourning spiraled into yet another reminder of how far Harry has drifted from the very values the royal family claims to uphold. The Duchess of Kent's passing should have highlighted compassion and unity. Instead, it exposed ego, entitlement, and the glaring divide between tradition and the Sussex brand of self-pity. Silence should have spoken respect, but Harry turned it into a tantrum. And once again, the headlines weren't about the Duchess's legacy, they were about his latest meltdown. At this point, the pattern is impossible to ignore. Every royal event, every private exchange, somehow mutates into another saga of Harry versus the institution. And the more he demands recognition, the more he looks like a man fighting shadows of his own make. History will remember the Duchess for her quiet dignity. But Harry, he risks being remembered as the royal who couldn't stop shouting into the void. And if you think this scandal was messy, wait until you see what insiders exposed about that infamous royal wedding. We covered it in detail right here on Star Spotlight. And trust me, you don't want to miss what was finally revealed.